Every year on Hollow's End, you hear a laugh cut through the air that sends chills down your spine. Few remember how the madness began. A paladin lost to grief, and the shadow that turned his sorrow to flame. This is the tale of the hand that beckoned death, and gave the horseman his name. The night had once been calm, 2 moons drifting in tandem through the quiet sky, their pale lights silvering the rooftops of a sleeping village. But the peace shattered like glass underfoot as fire surged through the eaves. Flames chewed through timber, casting long shadows down the narrow streets where townsfolk scrambled to flee with children in their arms and panic in their throats. The air itself seemed to crack open. Above the chaos a figure loomed, suspended not by magic or mercy, but by dread. A black-clad rider hovered mid-air, astride a warhorse whose hooves blazed with ghostly fire. His armor was thick and rigid, dark as charged steel, every edge sharpened by war. A tattered cape snapped behind him, catching the wind like torn banners on a battlefield. But he wore no helm. There was no face, only a skull, wreathed in unholy fire, its grin carved deep and cruel into bone. He raised his sword and cried out in a voice that shook the rooftops.
Prepare yourselves! The bells have tolled! Shelter your weak, your young, and your old! Each of you shall pay the final sum! Cry for mercy! The reckoning has come!
They say he rides when the season turns and shadows lengthen. He speaks as if he were judge, jury, and executioner. But it is not justice that moves him. It is rage given shape and flame. Whatever man he was lies buried beneath the armor and the fire. In his place rides a thing bound to dark magic, drawing strength from places no priest will name. He marks no difference between sinner and saint. Doors burn, streets glow. Those who stand before him, guilty or innocent, are taken by the same heat. Steel has not stopped him. Blessings slide off like rain on stone. When the sky splits and fire comes down, the living have but 2 choices: run or fall to ash. Many run. Some, even as they flee, still mouth a prayer to the light, though their voices sound small against the roar and laughter of the horsemen. That night the flames climbed higher as the horsemen swept low, casting fire with an open hand. Where it struck, people fell and did not rise. The sound of them carried through the lanes, thin and sharp between the crack of timber and the hiss of pitch. Any who lagged were swallowed by the heat. Mercy had no purchase here. 2 villagers, shaking but steady, lifted their bows. They knew it would fail, but felt they had to try. They drew and loosed all the same. The arrows flew true, one to the chest, one to the shoulder. Each found its mark. Each burst into flame the instant it touched him, curling away as ash on the wind. The rider did not slow. He only raised his hand again, and another wave of fire rolled through the town. And with it went the last pretense that anyone could make a stand.
Fire consumes! You've tried and failed! Let there be no doubt! Justice prevailed!
Before the Headless Horseman was fear and ruin made flesh, he was a paladin of the light, and his journey to becoming the horseman began in year 20 beneath Lordaeron's sky. Fences sagged under rot, doors held by trembling hands and rusted latches. The stench of plague clung to the air like smoke too stubborn to drift. Then came the thunder of hooves. One rider against the dark, cloak snapping in the wind, sword drawn, light blazing at his fingertips. A paladin, a symbol, a man. The scourge poured out to meet him, a swarm of rot and bone. He met them head on, a streak of steel and sunfire, light bursting from his gauntlets with the fury of a breaking storm. Each strike rang with purpose. His blade bit through the dead with methodical grace, not a motion wasted. Radiance flared at his shoulder, decay shriveled beneath it. For a time, the tide turned. Another surge followed, thicker with disease, fouler in breath. He gritted his teeth and drove deeper, fighting not for glory but for ground. For every step that led forward, another was dragged back into shadow. When at last silence returned, only ash stirred. The church bell rang with cautious hope. Windows creaked open, faces emerged, worn, stunned, alive. He sat in the saddle, blood drying on his armor, the gore of victory cooling fast. The village stood, for now. He had not always looked so grim atop a horse. Once the world had color. Once he had knelt and sworn himself to the light. A vow to shield the weak, to punish the cruel, to be the fire that kept the cold at bay. And for a time, it felt simple. Go where the trouble brewed, stand tall, and let righteousness carve a path through the dark. But since Arthas sailed for Northrend, the world had changed. The Silver Hand, once a hammer of judgment, now scattered across endless front lines, stretched too thin to hold the rod at bay. He had won a battle just last week, 5 against 1, odds that should have swallowed them whole, but they'd endured. He remembered the laughter, the bell, the brief warmth of a victory not yet tainted. Now, new smoke rode the wind, and he was bound for another hamlet, another fight, another reckoning. The light still answered when he called, but it felt smaller somehow. Less like a sun rising to banish darkness, more like a lone candle bracing against the breath of winter. He did not stop. He wouldn't. The oath remained, even if the meaning slipped through his hands like water. Still, the weight grew heavier, the victories thinner, the road darker. And in the spaces between hoofbeats, doubt whispered louder than the dead. The town still stood, though barely. Smoke lingered in the rafters of shattered homes. Blood had dried in the cracks of the cobbled street, scrubbed until it became part of the stone. The worst was over, for now, but peace sat uneasy on the shoulders of those who had survived. Soldiers moved in silence. 2 hefted a wrapped body into a cart that rolled through the village on groaning wheels, its load already heavy with the fallen. They would be burned before dusk. Nearby, townsfolk marked doors in chalk. An X, swift and final, was drawn over wood and iron alike, warnings to stay out, to pray from a distance, or to never return. The church was quiet. Inside, the paladin knelt beneath the colored light spilling through fractured stained glass. He had removed his helm, his gauntlets, his sword, but not the weight on his shoulders. Dust hung in the air, unmoving. He tilted his face toward the vaulted ceiling, eyes narrowed to the beams above as if the light might speak from somewhere in the cracks. His thoughts, as always, circled back to that day. When the prince ordered us to purge Stratholme, I never had a moment's doubt that it was a mistake. Such a deed would have defiled our sacred charge, protecting the people of Lordaeron. Lord Uther was right. There had to be another way. He had believed in that with every ounce of his soul. He still did, but belief alone had not stopped what followed. Still, for all my prayers, the people in this town are dying. Why do my efforts only slow this damnable plague instead of driving it out? He had fought tooth and nail to keep these people breathing. He had burned the infected, healed the wounded, driven back the rot. And yet, they still died. In the alleys, in the fields, in the pews just behind him. No matter how strong his will, how bright the light, he could only stall the inevitable. Now our supplies grow short, for we cannot rely on grain from Anderhall. The sick and healthy suffer alike. There was no more food. What little remained was sour, dry, or worse, contaminated. He'd seen children go to bed with nothing, mothers rationing water to their coughing husbands, brothers tearing cloth for bandages they'd never get back. All suffered, all prayed, and still the light was silent. Their suffering must have some higher purpose, but I cannot see it. Oh, light, guide my way, help me understand. But the chapel offered no answers. The sun dipped behind the clouds, dimming the glass until color gave way to gray. Outside, a cart rolled over the dirt, wheels groaning. A bell tolled softly from the tower. Another lost soul. The paladin did not rise. He stared through the window, jaw tight, heart heavy, and waited for the light to answer. It didn't. From behind the paladin, the chapel door creaked open on worn hinges, spilling in a beam of gold-touched dust and the scent of baked bread. A young voice followed close behind, breathless with excitement. "Sir Thomas, fresh food has arrived! 3 wagons full, and a message for you!" Thomas turned from the altar, the weight in his chest lifting just enough to allow a smile. He took the letter from Philip with a grateful nod, the boy's eyes shining with pride in the errand. "Light be praised," Thomas said, breaking the seal. "This is Baron Rivendare's work. He has always shared his wealth with the people. Go on and join your parents in the food line, Philip. I can hear your stomach gnawing at your backbone." Philip grinned wide, but being a boy raised on courtesy, he asked, "Would you like something to eat, Sir Thomas?" "No, a little hunger will clear my mind," Thomas replied, the warmth still in his voice. Philip headed toward the door, and when he opened it, he lingered one step longer, letting the smell of the village's feast do its work. With a playful smirk, he tried one last time. "Are you sure?" he asked. "The bread smells amazing." Thomas laughed, a short, honest sound that echoed off the stone. "Off with you, vile tempter." The door shut behind Philip, and the noise of the street faded, alone once more. Thomas turned from the light and lowered himself to his knees. Hands clasped tight, he bowed his head to the altar, the smile gone now, replaced by something quieter, heavier. "Please, holy light," he thought, "forgive your servant's doubts. A faith untested is a blade untempered. May this trial strengthen the people of Lordaeron and make us worthier agents of your loving purpose." No answer came, but he held the silence as sacred and whispered his prayer again. The chapel was dim, lit only by the trembling glow of a few half-burned candles. Their light danced against the walls, casting long shadows that shifted like breath. Thomas sat still beside the altar, his thoughts quiet, his spirit heavy. And then, something stirred beyond the stained glass window. A sound, faint but wrong. He rose, moving toward the light's edge, and peered through the fractured pane. What he saw wrecked him. His prayers, once offered in humility, twisted into something cruel, a mockery, a test not of faith but of endurance. This trial would indeed transform the townspeople, but not into worthier servants of the light. No, they had been claimed, mind and soul reshaped into mindless slaves of the Lich King's iron will. Philip stood just beyond the steps, his small frame swaying as if caught in an unseen tide. But his eyes, they were vacant, lifeless. The boy's skin had lost its warmth, and his jaw lolled open without a sound. He walked slowly toward the church, not with purpose, but with hunger. Behind him came the others, villagers Thomas had tended to, spoken with, prayed beside. Now they shuffled forward as husks of themselves. One was missing an arm, torn away at the elbow. Another's face had split, blood still wet along his brow. The line of them stretched back into the dark, silent and uncertain, drawn to the one man who had tried to save them. They were coming for him, not with rage, but with cold finality. A quiet certainty that the next breath he took might be his last, if he let it. But Sir Thomas would not go quietly. He had sworn to protect this town, and though its people now marched beneath the will of death, something of that oath still burned in him. He hated what had to be done, hated it down to his bones. But the choice had been taken from him. They were gone. What remained was the need to end their suffering. He burst from the chapel doors, sword gripped tight in both hands, the cool metal trembling with the fury that coursed through him. As his boot struck the earth, he called the light into his flesh, into the blade, into the very air around him. Radiance surged through the weapon, and as he landed, he carved a wide arc through the dead that circled near, sending limbs and shadow flying in the same breath. But he knew this could not be drawn out. Mercy now meant swiftness. Clenching his jaw, Thomas lifted his blade high and looked to the heavens. "One final reckoning," he whispered, not to the dead, but to the light itself. It answered. The sky opened and light came down, not as warmth, but as judgment. A pillar of searing power burst from the sword, erupting outward in a flash that drowned the square in holy fire. When the brilliance faded, silence followed. Where the town stood, only scorched stone and ash remained of its people. No undead stirred, no breath remained. Thomas fell to his knees. The blade slipped from his hands and stood buried in the earth. Hilt pointed skyward, as if still praying in his place. Around him lay the charred remnants of the people he had once sworn to protect. Neighbors, friends, children, Philip. Tears slipped down his face, wetting the ashes of those he fought to save. He stared at the ruin, the blood dried on his gauntlets, the silence that no light could cleanse. Later, when summoned to account for what had transpired, Thomas told them the truth. The town was lost. Nearly 1,000 souls had lived there. "The light came to me," he said, voice steady but hollow, "and I sent them to their final rest." He ended the report with a single sentence, spoken without ceremony. The Baron has much to answer for. At the heart of the chapel, a long table lay draped in maps and candlelight, where decisions were made and fate sealed. Flames danced in iron sconces and chandeliers overhead, casting long shadows that crept across the walls like reaching fingers. On the map, villages were marked with red ink, some already crossed through, others circled in grim anticipation. Around the table stood the high voices of the Silver Hand, the Grand Crusader himself, Saidan Dothrhan at the head next to Thomas, Asilian stoic beside him, and Abendis silent and watchful with arms folded. Thomas stood before them recounting every detail, what he'd seen, what he'd done, and what had been lost. When he finished, Asilian studied the open letter left beside the map. His voice, when it came, was quiet but certain. There was no refuting the evidence. Rivendare had betrayed them. The letter was written in his own hand. Dothrhan's gaze swept the map, then narrowed. Mark my words, this will not be the only town affected. The weight of it hung in the air like smoke from a spent fire. Abendis shifted his stance and added coldly that with every death, it meant another soldier joins the scourge. The words landed like stones, and guilt welled up sharp behind Thomas's ribs. The fault is mine, my lords. I should have taken precaution. But his confession was cut short as Saidan stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. He told Thomas he could not have known, and more than that, he should take comfort that this was not the end, informing Thomas that there were still paths ahead, already in motion. Alexandros Mograine had already departed for Ironforge. If fortune held, he would return with a weapon powerful enough to turn the tide. But Abendis reminded them that waiting on distant hopes was not enough. While they waited to see what comes of Mograine's venture to Ironforge, they needed to decide on a course of action. The table fell into agreement. Plans would be drawn, posts reassigned, and then Asilian looked at Thomas and said simply that he was dismissed. Thomas opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak further, Asilian cut in with a voice as flat as steel. An exhausted army is a weakened army. Go home and get some rest. There was no refusing it. Thomas gave a quiet nod and stepped back. Saidan moved with him, walking beside him through the corridor's worn stone arches. Even as he left the chamber, Thomas could not let go of the need to act. He turned, voice low, asking if there was anything he could do, something useful. There had to be something. Saidan met his eyes and spoke with quiet conviction. Think, my brother, your family still lives. No one here begrudges you the time it takes you to watch over your loved ones. So many have died. We must find joy where we can. Rejoice in your good fortune. It is a luxury few among us know. So he took his leave with the heavy quiet of a man heading home through a world unraveling. 5 days passed in silence as Thomas made his way home, each mile a slow shedding of battle's shadow. The road cut through whispering fields and quiet woods where the war had not yet touched. But even here, the weight of what he carried trailed behind him like a second cloak. Back at his homestead, night had fully fallen, and the sky stretched wide and clear, 2 moons hanging bright above the quiet land. 2 children made their way up the dirt path, one pushing a wooden cart that rattled over loose stones, the other carrying a sack in both arms. Dust curled at their ankles, and their cheeks were flushed from the effort. Behind them walked their mother, steady and unhurried, a bundle of provisions balanced in one arm as she kept a watchful eye on her pair of helpers. Bring the rest of the food inside, she called, not breaking stride, and be careful with the preserves. Then it's off to bed with you. Aw, Mom, her son muttered with a small groan, both hands on the car pushing it toward the house. She just smiled, and don't aw Mom me. They finished their chores with practiced rhythm, and before long the children were tucked into bed beneath faded quilts, their mother's hands brushing hair from their foreheads as they blinked sleepily at the ceiling. When is Daddy coming home? Her daughter asked, voice soft, half lost to a yawn. Soon, sweetheart, she said with a smile, pressing a kiss to her brow. But when the door was shut behind her and the lantern flickered to life in her quiet bedroom, the smile slipped away. Her thoughts pressed forward like a tide she could no longer hold back. I keep telling them soon, my love, but I do not know how much longer they or I can believe. As the flame caught and cast its glow across the room, she gasped. A figure sat in the corner, still as stone, but the fear melted in an instant when she saw the face. Thomas. The leaf bloomed across her features, only to be snatched away again as her eyes fell to the dark stains across his armor. She rushed toward him, alarm breaking through her composure. "You're hurt!" Thomas raised a wary hand, halting her before she could reach him. "It's not my blood," he said, voice low. "This is scourge filth. I came across a pocket of undead on the way here." While she was curious, she said nothing. There would be time for questions later, but for now, he was home, and that was enough. Thomas sat still in the chair by their bed, armor half unbuckled, road dust clinging to the edges of his boots. The lantern on the nightstand flickered low, casting a dull amber glow that caught the edge of his jaw, and the line of wear beneath his eyes. Susanna stood in front of him, arms folded, the window to her right letting in only the faintest trace of moonlight. "I picked up dire news along the journey," Thomas said at last, voice rough, worn thin. "King Tyrannus is dead, murdered. Capital City has fallen. It was Arthas. He's leading a scourge army through Lordaeron." Silence settled between them like dust. Susanna blinked, trying to make sense of words that shouldn't have existed together. Then, with a slow uncertainty, she said, "Maybe Northrend drove Arthas to madness." Her tone faltered as she added that it was a harsh land, maybe it caused it. "No. Remember the massacre he and his men carried out in Stratholme? If this is madness, he bore the seeds of it long before he took the fleet north. He and the other traitors cannot go unpunished, free to commit even darker crimes." His voice sharpened as he spoke, each word like a fresh blade. Rage stirred in his eyes, not just fury at Arthas, but at himself, at all of them, for letting this happen. "Too many people have died, and worse yet, many have been forced into the Scourge's ranks." Susanna stepped forward and laid a steady hand on his shoulder. Her voice was soft but not pleading. "He is the man you once called brother. There must be someone in your order who can still get through to him." The room changed, the air shifted. Thomas snapped, turning toward her, voice ringing out like steel on stone. "Have you heard nothing I've said? Capital City is in ruins. He killed his own father." For a moment, he stayed frozen in place, breath shallow, eyes wide with grief, barely held in check. Then he turned and moved toward the door, the floor creaking beneath his boots. Just before stepping through the threshold, he paused, his voice gentler now, hollowed by what it had cost him to say it. "His motives no longer matter. His crimes are beyond forgiveness. He is the enemy, has been the enemy for some time now." Susanna didn't follow. She stood alone, framed in the pale light from the window, staring at her reflection in the darkened glass, worry and fear on her face. Thomas didn't see it. But as he walked into the night, the weight in his chest pressed heavier than armor. He couldn't shake the thought that he was the biggest fool of all, that maybe if they had opened their eyes sooner, it could have been prevented. 4 days passed in peace, though the air still carried the weight of things unspoken. The war had yet reached this patch of land, and in that borrowed quiet, Thomas sat with his children in the yard, beneath a sky streaked with amber light. The grass was warm beneath them, the wind soft, and for a while the world seemed small enough to hold. Joel and Gina sat cross-legged in the dirt, fiddling with the grass. Thomas's voice carried low but steady as he spun his tale, each word heavy with meaning not yet grasped by the children at his feet. "Infuriated by the spoiled prince's carelessness," he began, "the mysterious woman cursed him and his family. The king had fallen into an enchanted sleep, she told the prince. Retrieve the sword from the lake or he will die in 3 days' time. You will have until sunset on the 3rd day." Joel and Gina leaned closer, eyes wide. The spoiled prince waded into the lake, but something nipped at his toes, and he jumped out. He soon discovered that the lake was now full of man-eating fish. The mysterious old woman made it clear that the prince had to retrieve the sword alone and unaided. For the next 2 days, he tried everything he could think of to get the sword out of the lake, He tried fishing it out, but the hook was too small, and the sword was too heavy. He wrapped pieces of meat in cloth and leather and threw them into the lake. But the hungry fish gnawed through the material in seconds. There were so many fish, and no matter how much he fed them, they were always hungry for more. The lake was deep, and heavy armor was out of the question, as he would sink and drown. Finally, the desperate prince knew he had to take action or his father would die. So he wrapped himself up in leather as best he could and he dove into the lake. The fish attacked him immediately, yet he kept swimming as quickly as he could. Wounded and growing weaker, he grabbed the sword. Up he swam, sword in hand, fighting for every inch as the fish bit and tore at him. At last, in agony, he reached the surface and threw the sword to safety on the shore, just before the fish pulled him under for the last time. The king was saved, the curse unmade. The prince's blood, his sin had paid. For a moment, only the wind spoke. Joel looked up, frowning, his voice uncertain. What does it mean? His voice, when it came, held the weight of hard-earned conviction. You asked why Prince Arthas did those bad things. He did them because they were the easy choices. It would have been much harder to stay and fight for Lordaeron. Good people have died doing just that. But no one said following the light would be easy. It's hard to be selfless and honorable. It's hard to fight the good fight. If it weren't hard, it wouldn't be heroic. The words hung in the air, heavier than before. Joel said nothing, and neither did Gina. But their eyes lingered on their father a little longer. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, the fire crackled low beside them, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. Thomas stood across from Susanna, the harsh glow catching the edges of her hair and softening the road-worn lines of his face. In his hand, the letter hung. He didn't ease into it, he told her the truth. She had to take the children and leave. There was a land called Kalimdor far across the sea, where a powerful sorceress named Jaina Proudmoore could protect them. With her father ruling Kultiris, there was hope for sanctuary, safety, distance from the scourge. It was the only path left. Susanna's expression hardened, her voice rose with disbelief. I've never even heard of this land called Kalimdor. It sounds like one of those wild stories you tell the children. Thomas held her gaze, his voice low but pleading. Lordaeron is growing dangerous. You and the children would be safer under Lady Proudmoore's protection. Her eyes searched his face, softening for a moment. Then come with us. He shook his head. You know I cannot. No matter how many ships Kultiris sends, there won't be enough space for everyone. The Silver Hand must protect those left behind. With the mighty sword Ashbringer, High Lord Mograine has been taking down the Scourge's numbers. The tide of battle is turning. With Lord Uther and High Lord Mograine to lead us, we will surely drive the undead from our land. In the meantime, I need to know you are safe. She took the letter from his hand, her eyes scanning the words as the fire popped next to her. Then, without a word, she turned and cast the parchment into the flames. Thomas's hand snapped forward to catch it, but too late. It was already gone, curling, blackening, reduced to ash in the space between heartbeats. He looked at her, stunned. Her own eyes were wet now, gleaming with quiet defiance. I know you too well. You worry about everyone except yourself, she said, her voice shaking. If we left for Kalimdor, we would never see you again, would we? She took one step closer. If you stay, my love, we all stay. The fire whispered next to them, shadows dancing over the walls as they stepped into each other's arms. Not out of victory, not out of peace, but because in a world unraveling, this moment was the only thing they could still choose, and together they chose it. The sun had barely cleared the treetops when the rider came, dust trailing behind his horse like smoke. He bore the silver hand tabard and a face creased by travel and news that left no room for ceremony. His words were swift, grim. Many had been killed in the night. Thomas could only ask if the rider was certain. Even as the words left him, he hardly believed them, and still less the answer he received. When the rider left, Thomas stepped back into the house. and returned moments later with his sword and a sharpening stone, settling in near the porch on a tree stump, and with the thought that the world around him felt suddenly brittle. From morning until early afternoon, he sat alone with the blade, sharpening again and again. The rhythmic rasp of steel meeting stone carried through the yard, an unspoken drumbeat of dread. Fear was carved plain across his face, though he never flinched. His movements were steady, almost mechanical, as if somewhere inside him the repetition might hold off the horror. Maybe, if the edge was just right, it could make a difference. Maybe this was all still some terrible dream. But it wasn't. This was reality, his new reality. He just couldn't believe it. By the time the sun had climbed past its peak, Susanna could take no more. She stepped outside, voice breaking the stillness like shattered glass. She begged him to stop, pleaded for him to speak, to tell her what had happened, what was wrong. Thomas didn't look up. He said only that he needed to keep sharpening. She stepped closer, her voice trembling now. "You've been sharpening your sword for hours," she said. "You're scaring the children. And me." The sharpening stone halted for the first time all day, but Thomas said nothing, not yet. The truth weighed too much for words. Thomas sat hunched on the old tree stump, his sword across his lap, the sharpening stone forgotten at his feet. The afternoon breeze stirred the dust, but he didn't notice. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of what he'd held in for too long. Susanna stood nearby, off to his side, watching him with worry etched deep into her face. At last, his voice broke through the silence, raw and hollow. He looked up at her, fear and confusion swimming in his eyes. "Lord Uther, the Lightbringer himself, the pillar of our order, is dead. Many other paladins as well, some of our best fighters." The words barely had time to settle before rage ignited behind them. "Arthas again!" he roared, gripping the sword until the steel groaned beneath his fingers. "1,000 curses on his name! No punishment could ever be enough for this betrayal!" His voice rang like a war cry, but there was no battlefield, only the stillness of the yard, and the woman who loved him. His knuckles whitened, one hand clenched the hilt, the other wrapped around the edge of the blade, too tight. Blood welled where steel met skin, running down his palm and dripping onto the grass. "Thomas!" Susanna rushed to him, dropping to her knees in front of the stump. Her hands caught his, coaxing them away from the blade. "Let go," she whispered, and gently pried the weapon from his grasp. The sword fell with a soft thud beside them. His fury gave way to grief, and his voice cracked. You must take the children and leave. I can't lose you. I can't." As she wrapped his hand with quiet precision, he couldn't hold back anymore. Tears welled in his eyes. The wound had opened far deeper than flesh. When the dressing was tied and secure, Susanna stood before him. Thomas reached forward, arms wrapping around her waist, and pulled her close. He pressed her head to her chest, closing his eyes as her heartbeat met his ear. "Very well, my love," she whispered, her voice soft with sorrow but strong with resolve. "We'll do as you ask. We'll go." And in that fragile stillness, where the war could not yet reach them, they held on to the only peace they still had, each other. The monastery loomed quiet beneath the gray swell of an overcast sky. The courtyard stones were slick with the breath of an oncoming storm, the wind carrying the scent of wet earth and iron. Thomas stepped through the archway with his cloak drawn tight, weariness etched into the lines of his face. The weight of his choice still clung to his shoulders like sodden mail. Satan met him just inside the main hall, his presence as steady as ever. He asked if Thomas was able to get his family to safety, which Thomas answered, "I put them on the ship myself. A storm is approaching, but the fleet will be safely at sea before it arrives." Satan nodded, his voice low and measured. "Such partings can be difficult. My wife did not want to go." "Truly?" Satan raised a brow. "Your Susanna has the heart of a warrior." Thomas didn't hesitate, his gaze hardened, jaw set with something deeper than grief. "I could wish she had the heart of a mother instead." At that, Satan stepped closer, placing a firm hand on his brother's shoulder. "But they are one and the same," he said. "Have you not felt it when you fight the scourge? Have you not thought of your fallen brethren and been filled with holy wrath? Wouldn't any man reach with righteous fury to an evil that threatened his loved ones?" He clenched his fists, eyes narrowing. "We fight hardest to protect what we love the most." Thomas looked away, the storm wind beginning to whisper through the high window slats. "Yes, I suppose you're right. I just want my family to be safe." "Of course you do," Satan said, a flicker of sympathy in his voice. "Still, we're never perfectly safe until we're dead, are we? And in these dread times, not even then." He turned then, cloak trailing behind him as he approached the war table near the altar, where a fresh map of the region lay unrolled and weighed with stone weights. His tone shifted, not unkind but sharpened by purpose. "On that note, brother, let us speak of the future." Many of the Order's mightiest had fallen, champions of the light who once stood as beacons across Lordaeron's war-torn fields. But still the ragged knights of the Silver Hand endured, their banners frayed, their ranks thinned, yet their resolve held fast against the darkness. The forces of the Lich King showed no signs of relenting, sweeping through the kingdom like a tide of ice and rot. Village by village, grave by grave, the dead clawed forward. For 4 long years, the paladins held their ground. They fought not for glory but for survival, and for one another. And they remained united not by creed alone, but by the unshakable will of one man, a great man, High Lord Alexandros Mograine. It was his strength that bound them, his voice that rallied them, his blade, Ashbringer, that turned the tide more than once. And then, out of the blue, that man died. The Silver Hand, already fractured, could not withstand the loss. When Mograine fell, the Order shattered. In its place, a new force rose from the ruins, stern, unyielding, and born of grief. The Scarlet Crusade, an order whose members vowed to rid the world of the undead, no matter the cost. And the cost grew steeper with every battle. The sun had barely crested the rooftops when the Scarlet Crusade rode into the town, crimson cloaks fluttering behind them like blood caught in the wind. Steel-clad hooves struck stone, and the thrum of disciplined motion filled the square. At the head of the procession rode Dothrhan, his armor polished, his gaze like the edge of a sharpened blade. Behind him, Thomas followed in silence, unsure of what to expect from the quiet village nestled in the hills. As the townsfolk gathered, uneasy and blinking in the early light, one man stepped forward from the crowd, his voice trembling under the weight of nervous courtesy. "Now there's no need for any trouble here," he stammered. "You Crusaders are all welcome here. Indeed, we are most grateful for your valiant efforts against the plague. You'll find no sickness in my town. We'll submit to any tests you like." Satan's voice rang out, grim and low. "It's just as I suspected. Although it grieves me to say this, I fear we have arrived too late." Thomas turned toward him, brows raised. "Too late? I see no sign of plague." Satan shifted in his saddle and looked at Thomas squarely. "The plague was first spread through tainted wheat, but the Lich King has since resorted to other methods. New traitors join his forces with every passing year, drawn by the promise of immortality. Immortality, bah! More like slavery without end. Yet many have lost their faith in the light. Many have chosen to save their lives by sacrificing their souls. The enemy has grown in subtlety. So too must we. Look at them closely, brother, and tell me what you see." Thomas glanced across the gathering crowd, uncertain. "I see clothing of many different types," he answered. "Indeed," Satan said with a nod. "Refugees from the Scourge, drawn here by the promise of shelter. Word must have spread far and wide." "Why?" Thomas hesitated. "The town seems to have been spared so far. These people look clean and well fed." "An unusual sight in these times," Satan replied, narrowing his eyes. "Particularly given the town's flimsy defenses." Thomas studied the watchmen posted along the streets and muttered, "Few guards, and they all look young, inexperienced. Exactly, Satan said, his voice sharpening. I doubt they could repel even one attack by the undead. How could they have guided others to safety here? These are no battle-hardened veterans. They are frightened children cowering in the dark. By what means could they secure the supplies necessary to sustain a town of this size? Thomas stiffened, the weight of realization dawning on him. You're saying we have another scourge conspirator on our hands? Satan's expression hardened. A creature of great patience and cold-blooded cunning. Thomas's voice dropped as the pieces fell into place. Someone who kept the town supplied and protected for weeks, even months, while he spreads the word that this town was a haven from the plague. He was waiting for the town to reach critical mass, all while plotting to unleash the plague. Yes, Thomas. And given the size of this town, there can be no doubt that the process is already in motion. Thomas leaned forward in his saddle, guilt flooding his voice. I am a fool. Satan guided his horse closer, placing a steady hand on Thomas's shoulder. You are human. You suffered the consequences of Rivendare's betrayal firsthand, and you found it difficult to face that pain a second time. It's only natural. Thomas looked up at him, something shifting behind his eyes. Someday I hope to share your unflinching spiritual insight. You will, brother. But for now, we must act. You have seen what these people will suffer. Thomas turned his gaze back to the crowd, innocent faces, unaware of what slumbered among them. His voice was resolute now, his jaw set. They are the walking dead, and they do not even know. The best we can hope to do is give them a clean death. Good man, Satan said, resting one gauntleted hand on the pommel of his sword. The sky above the town was clear, but the storm had already arrived. The village fell into chaos like a candle snuffed out by a storm. One moment it stood, quiet and wary, and the next, the Scarlet Crusade swept through its streets like a red tide. The Order's banners whipped in the wind, their battle cries rising above the commotion of horror as steel met flesh. No one was spared. Men, women, and children all fell beneath their blades. A mother died where she stood, her child still clutching her hand as the sword cleaved through her skull. A father threw himself between a crying boy and a crusader's strike, only to feel the steel punch through his chest. The air filled with screams and pleas, desperate voices crying for mercy, swearing they were not sick. But the crusade had long since stopped listening. They saw no people here, only plague. Their purge became a massacre. Thomas rode among them, the weight of Satan's conviction echoing in his head. A child broke from the crowd, running through the smoke, crying out, "Please, stop! I'm not sick!" The boy's voice cracked under terror, but Thomas's horse thundered forward. His sword flashed once. The chase ended with a single stroke, and the boy fell without a sound. The fire set by the Scarlet Crusade spread, crackling through thatch and timber, devouring what the crusade did not cut down. When dawn came, only ash remained. And that was only the beginning. 2 months later, an hour's ride north of Dayson's Tears, the Scarlet Crusade struck again. They rode into another village beneath a gray sky morning, their armor streaked with soot and zealotry. The cries were the same, the smell of burning was the same. They called it purification. Their clean death. Thomas charged with the others, blade raised, smoke trailing in his wake. A woman ran ahead of him through the haze, clutching 2 children close. He shouted and his body acted before his mind could follow. His sword came down once, twice, cutting through the woman, through the boy, through the small figure behind her. And then, as the girl's cry was silenced and her eyes met his, realization struck like lightning. He froze, the sword slipped from his hands, sinking point first into the dirt. His breath came ragged. It can't be. Gina. The world fell away. Before him lay his wife, face down in the mud, a gash splitting her back. Beside her, his son, his chest tore open where the blade had passed clean through. And there, crumpled like a fallen doll, his little girl, eyes still open, staring back at him. Thomas dropped to his knees, trembling. Can't be. They're not here. They're safe. His voice wavered, broken between breaths. He looked at his hands, slick, red, shaking, and the words poured out like a fever. "Not here. Safe in Kalimdor, unless... What if the storm arrived too soon? Their ship was to be the last one to leave the harbor. What if the storm damaged it before it could depart? With Lordaeron in tatters, there would be no shipwright to repair the damage. There wouldn't have been any room to spare on the other ships. Too many people taking their chances with Kalimdor, forced to stay in Lordaeron, taking refuge wherever they could. No way to let me know." He crawled toward them, reaching out with blood-stained fingers to hold his family one last time. "Don't touch them!" one of his brothers shouted. "They're infected!" Thomas heard them but didn't care. He yelled back, "They're not infected!" He screamed back, his voice raw, breaking as he turned his wife over in his arms. "This is my family!" His cry tore through the smoke. "What have I done?" The soldiers rushed him, trying to pull him away, but grief made him stronger than sense. He fought them off, clinging to the bodies as they struggled to drag him back. "Light, have mercy! Mercy!" He screamed, the words tearing out of him like a prayer turned curse. But there was no mercy, not from the men who held him, not from the light above. And as the world dimmed and the blow came to silence his screams, Thomas knew he had long since ceased to believe that the light had any mercy left to give. Back within the cold stone walls of the Scarlet Monastery, the stillness of Thomas's chamber was laced with unnatural stirrings, murmurs that slithered through the cracks in the door, laughter too now and then, and the rise and fall of words strung together like lullabies that forgot how to soothe. He hadn't spoken in earnest for days, hadn't moved, save to flinch from his own thoughts. He sat in the hush of candlelight, hollow-eyed and frayed at the edges, grief twisting through him like a blade left buried. Outside the door, Satan stepped from the chamber, the setting sun spilling through the window ahead of him. He looked to the guards flanking the hall and spoke with a measured tone. It must have been a terrible shock finding out that his wife and children were infected. He walked slowly to the nearby window, his gaze drifting down into the courtyard below. And being forced to end their suffering himself. Well, that is a tragedy many of us can empathize with all too well. Behind him, one of the guards shifted, unease in his eyes. Sir, I fear there's more at work than just simple grief. Satan turned slightly, brow raised. Explain. The other guard answered before his comrade could find the words. The things we've heard coming from his room, they're not normal. Sometimes he doesn't even sound human. Laughing and howling and sobbing all tangled up together, the first added, his voice hushed. And those creepy rhymes, the second muttered. Things that stay in your head for days and give you bad dreams. Satan regarded them both with the faintest smile, his expression calm, unbothered. There's no cause for alarm. We all deal with grief in different ways. He turned back to the window, his eyes drawn once more to the movement below. The grass had been trampled to mud, choked in places by ash and blood. 2 bodies hung from the crooked tree at the center, one turning slowly in the wind, the other cleaved from the chest down, ribs like splintered wood jutting toward the darkening sky. But the dead were not yet finished with this place. The field swarmed with motion as the Scarlet Crusade clashed with the Scourge. Crusaders moved in tight ranks, blades flashing with practiced zeal, tabards streaked red and black. Ghouls surged through the mist like starving dogs, leaping onto armored men and dragging them down into the soil. One knight screamed as teeth found his neck, his voice lost beneath the wet crunch of bone. Steel rang, spells cracked, limbs flew like leaves in a storm. But that was not the focus of Satan's thoughts. Today is Hallow's end, he said softly, and we must keep Lordaeron's traditions alive even in the midst of this struggle. What else, after all, are we fighting for? The guards exchanged glances as Satan continued. In this case, of course, I refer to the Wicker Man. Ah, I surprise you. I take it you two never spent Hallow's End near Capital City? Then you missed quite a sight. A giant straw effigy that people all over Lordaeron came to see. It was said that if you threw a branch onto the Wicker Man's fire, you could burn away whatever you didn't want to take with you into winter. Fears, sorrows, old loves, and new hates, you could put them all behind you. His eyes gleamed as he watched the Crusaders below. Yes, the more I think on it, the more certain I am. Hallow's end will be the end of Thomas's suffering. It's the perfect time to remember loved ones we have lost and to let their memories go. Behind him, the guards fell silent, and in the chamber beyond the door, the broken muttering of a man unmoored from himself carried on through the stone. And so, with soft words and a hardened smile, the Grand Crusader persuaded Thomas to return to the field. Lordaeron, he said, needed its heroes. And Thomas, weary and hollowed by loss, answered the call to fight off the scourge near the monastery. The battle that followed was fierce. Steel clashed beneath a sky blackened by smoke, and the shrieks of the scourge echoed across the blood-slicked stone. Thomas charged into the fray with wild abandon, his blade flashing with the fury of a man who no longer feared death. When his frenzied attacks drew the attention of a wave of undead, the Scarlet Crusaders surged to his side, ready to defend their comrade, only to learn too late that he was no longer their comrade at all. Without hesitation, Thomas drove his sword through the chest of a fellow Crusader, burying it to the hilt. He turned with a twisted grin, eyes alight with something unholy, and laughed, a sound that barely belonged to a man. The laughter spilled into rhyme as he carved through friend and foe alike.
Duped for far too long by lies, I see you now through clearer eyes. Infected all, you too shall fall. The light win out through your demise.
Limbs fell, screams followed, his blade moved without pause, severing arms, opening throats, cutting down those who only moments before had stood at his side.
I'll make this land a funeral pyre and end your curse with cleansing fire,
he howled, swinging wide, the tip of his blade trailing sparks as blood soaked the earth beneath him. And then, in a single flash of steel, it ended. A soldier broke from the chaos behind him and cleaved Thomas's head clean from his shoulders, the body collapsing mid-rhyme. His rampage was over. The Scarlet Crusade had been forced to put down one of its own. That night, silence hung heavy in the halls of the Scarlet Monastery. Outside Thomas's chamber, Satan stood with hands folded behind his back, his voice composed and calm. I'll prepare Thomas's body for burning. Although his mind was shattered by grief, he fought bravely for our cause. Remember him in your prayers. But within these blood-stained walls, the prayers of the Scarlet Crusade had become an obscenity. Their deeds, merciless and unrelenting, had long since twisted into a violation of the very light they claimed to serve. Satan stepped inside, closing the chamber door behind him. The latch clicked shut. And then, the illusion faded. Flesh tore like parchment. Holy armor fell from shoulders now hunched and monstrous. Two great horns curled upward from a skull of pale gray, and glowing eyes flared beneath a brow not meant for man. The Grand Crusader was gone. In his place stood the truth, Balnazar, Dreadlord of the Nothrazim.
Exactly as I'd hoped,
he murmured, towering over the lifeless corpse.
Humans, so weak and malleable. How you ever managed to oppose the Legion, I cannot fathom. You merely delayed the inevitable.
He sat beside the body of Thomas, watching it as a craftsman might regard unfinished work.
Arise, my dear brother. Feel the strength return to your limbs. Strength I give you freely to use as you will. Whatever your choices, I know they will serve my ends.
He sliced open his own palm, letting thick, corrupted blood spill forth. It dripped onto the corpse below, dark, seething, full of ancient power.
You will be one of my finest creations, a tribute to the Master, until the day he returns to crush Azeroth.
The blood was enough. With a jolt, the body stirred. The air grew hot, then cracked with flame. Hooves struck the stone, igniting it beneath them, and a horse, wreathed in fire, rose into the air, carrying its rider with it. Eyes burned like twin furnaces, its mane and tail blazed like banners of war. Thomas was gone. In his place rode the horseman. He took flight without hesitation, fire trailing in his wake, his voice booming down upon a village already aflame.
Scream, you dogs! Curse my name! I'll set your matchstick homes aflame! Perhaps the worms will find you sweet, You're nothing to me but rotting meat. He came crashing down like judgment made flesh, his steed rearing high, nostrils flaring smoke as his blade caught the firelight. I fought for you, I fought in vain. Now scatter, scurry, shriek in pain. No mercy on this night abides, on Hallow's End, when the horseman rides.
For years, he came with the turning of the season, a rider cloaked in fire and madness, his laughter rising above the roar of burning wood. When Hallow's End drew near and the veil between worlds grew thin, the horseman rode again. He called it cleansing. The towns he left in cinders called it something else. All across Azeroth, the people prepared. Buckets were filled, fire brigades assembled, and adventurers steeled themselves for the coming storm. Each year, blades were raised against the horseman's wrath, and each year, no matter how many times he was cut down, he returned. A maniacal laugh marked his passage. The crackle of flame marked his work, always returning, always burning. Until he didn't. One year, the fires didn't come at all. Hallow's End passed in eerie quiet, and the horseman did not ride. Another year passed, then another still, and many began to believe he had finally been laid to rest. The world exhaled. But peace, like ash, never settles for long. It began with a book. A simple prayer tome, worn with use, kept by an orphaned matron as a keepsake of a man long gone, Sir Thomas Thomson. But one day it moved. Not gently. It flung itself to the ground and cracked open, pages fluttering until one lay flat. Upon it, a single name was written, in some sort of spectral ink, the name of the adventurer who had once freed Thomas from his curse. They followed its call back to the place where it had all unraveled, the Scarlet Monastery. At the hill leading up to the monastery stood Thomas, no longer fire-wreathed, but no less haunted. He spoke with sorrow in his voice and shadow in his eyes. When he was freed from the curse, he had finally gotten to see his family. And for a time, it was perfect. But suddenly, Susanna was gone, as if she never existed. The monastery grounds crawled with restless spirits, fallen crusaders, innocent dead, shades caught in loops of memory and nightmare. Thomas believed one of them might hold a key, a whisper, a name, a fragment of truth that could lead him back to her. Shades drifted along the road, not silent, not at peace. Some paced as if still on duty, crusader tabards clinging to hollow forms. Others stood frozen in their final moments. A pair huddled near a tree, voices brittle with fear. One asked if they would be all right, the other gave no comfort, only the truth as they saw it. We're all going to die. Farther in, the memories grew sharper, crueler. A terrified mother sobbed as she reached for armored silhouettes, pleading that her children were with her. The crusaders didn't move. They were echoes, or perhaps executioners, caught in an eternal hesitation. Sir Thomas moved among them, jaw tight, eyes hard. But the ghosts were not content to pass in silence. One of them stepped forward with the bearing of a commander, broad-shouldered, proud, his voice sharp with hollow righteousness. The Grand Crusader, Satan himself. Or rather, what remained of the lie. The shade lashed out, forcing steel to answer steel. When it was cut down, Thomas spoke. Not to anyone, but perhaps to himself. How could I not see what he was? His hand hovered near his chest as if trying to still a storm beneath his ribs. Maybe I didn't want to. They reached the stairs. There, just before the monastery doors, she stood. Susanna. Thomas called her name, but she didn't answer. Her eyes held no warmth, only a sorrow that shimmered like frost. Then, her form twisted into a shade of guilt. It attacked with a fury born not of vengeance but accusation. When it fell, it did not curse or weep. It only said one thing. Murderer. Thomas froze. His breath hitched. He said he hadn't known. He couldn't have known. He said it again and again. Then he turned, stumbling forward to the archway heading behind the monastery. The dead did not sleep easily on the grounds of the Scarlet Monastery, even with the horseman buried and his vengeance stilled. Sir Thomas returned not as a weapon, but as a man, one reaching for whatever fragment of peace remained. At his side walked the outsider, drawn once more into the undertow of the Crusade's long shadow. They passed training shades along the path, flickering echoes of fallen crusaders locked in a war that no longer listened. Past them, near a fountain at the top of the hill, a strange glimmer stirred in the dark, and Thomas paused. Something about the stone nearby tugged at him, as if memory itself whispered from within it. Then she appeared, not a twisted shade, but a ghost that still held shape and light. His wife, Susanna. For a single breath, hope surged in him, but her voice shattered it just as fast, crying out that it was a trap. And it was. Darkness snapped around him before he could move. It took hold like a vice, a ritual already in motion. From the edge of the fountain stepped Jerome Hayton, once a crusader, now a zealot unmoored by madness. He believed the horseman was not a curse to be cured, but a weapon to be reborn. His ritual, fueled by soulstones and blind devotion to the long-dead Grand Crusader, would see it done. Thomas screamed as the shadows clawed into him, and Susanna pleaded for help. The ritual's power was anchored by foci scattered through the monastery grounds, soulstones feeding the magic, each one a tether to pain. With no time to waste, the outsider ran. They moved through the monastery's heart, breaking each focus in turn. With every stone shattered, voices cried out from the veil. Twisted remnants of fallen crusaders, tortured and bound. Their words were jumbled with agony and fury, each soul a casualty of Jerome's unholy craft. Susanna followed closely, shaken by the depth of corruption, wondering aloud how such dark magic had taken root. At last, the final tether fell, but already the sky had begun to darken. Back at the fountain, Jerome stood impatient, refusing to halt the ritual. The soulstones had done their work. Thomas cried out once more, a final wrenching sound that broke across the stone. The air cracked, and then the horseman returned. He rose not as a man, but as a revenant of wrath, fire reawakened, vengeance reborn. Jerome, trembling with devotion, welcomed his creation, urging him to bring the flame that would cleanse Azeroth. But the horseman's cleansing began with him. He struck Jerome down without hesitation, flame ripping through flesh and cloth, then turned and rode for the monastery, trailing fire in his wake. Susanna stood in the silence that followed, and in that moment, all she could do was whisper his name. Within the scorched bones of the Scarlet Monastery, the final chapter of Thomas Thomson's long torment began. The adventurer returned not for glory or gold, but as a kindness for Susanna, who had begged for her husband's soul. What stood in their way was no longer Thomas. The horseman had taken full shape once more, fire in his fists and madness behind his laughter. The chamber lit with the first strike. Flames curled in arcs across the floor as the horseman roared and rhymed his fury, casting judgment like a blade in the dark. Each blow was a memory, each spell a scar he could not forget. The adventurer pressed on through smoke and cinders, dodging bursts of fire, pushing closer as the shadows deepened. It was not an easy battle. This was no mere ghost clinging to a grudge. This was rage forged by loss, shaped by betrayal, and hardened across years of cursed returns. And yet when the final blow landed, the fire did not roar, it sighed. The horseman fell still, and in the silence that followed, Thomas Thomson returned. Susanna was the first to reach him. There were no grand declarations, no celestial fanfare, just two souls standing together once more. The long war behind them. Thomas looked to the adventurer who had stood firm against his fury and said his thanks.
It is done. The Headless Horseman is no more.
Then let us rest, my love. At long last.
My family is whole again, as is my soul. I cannot thank you enough, champions.
Then, with Susanna beside him, he stepped into the quiet beyond, no longer cursed, no longer bound, a father, a husband, finally free to go home. And that's going to do it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed. Thanks for checking it out. Now at the end, I kind of had to change a couple things to make it work with having the horseman be gone for a few years and then having him come back, but I think it worked. Either way, please do take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.